From multiple coin-op locations in Minneapolis or near enough, this is Nice Games Club, the show where nice game devs talk gaming and game development. I'm Martha McGarry, and I make nice games.
I'm Stephen McGregor, and I make nice games.
I'm Martha Croy, I too make nice games.
And hey, I'm Ellen Burns-Johnson, and I also make nice games.
For this week's episode, our topics are redundancy and arcades. And so, if everyone is ready,
let's start. So, Martha, how did it feel doing that intro without hearing the theme song in the background?
Very weird.
Yeah. Well, it went spectacularly.
It made me really nervous.
Oh, and it's weird, right? Like it's weird.
Yeah.
Well, here we are, separately recording for our second session remotely during the worldwide quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a special guest. Ellen is joining us.
Hey.
Yeah.
Listeners will know Ellen from many episodes she's been on in the past, and here to talk about some fun topics, including, to start out with, the most important perennial topic on this program, Star Trek. For a couple of reasons.
Of course.
All right, Steven, I know you're like, oh, this again.
Yep.
But there's three really good reasons why we're talking about Star Trek in this episode.
Oh, I'm sure.
First, we're recording this on April 5th, which is First Contact Day.
Okay.
So for Star Trek fans who know,
Contact Day.
in 2063, the Vulcans arrive to Bozeman, Montana, to visit the site of the first warp ship launch, which heralded mankind's entry into the neighborhood of the galaxy.
Humankind.
It's a very important date, and so every year on April 5th, we talk about Star Trek.
Okay.
Which is not that much different from most days.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of May 4th.
Sure. That makes sense.
Keeps the world in balance.
Yes.
Stephen, have you seen? There's the movie that depicts this moment. First Contact? Have you seen it?
No, I haven't. No.
It's one of the best Star Trek movies because it's just a great action movie and it has lots of really good Star Trek themes. It's just a good movie generally.
Okay. Cool.
Would the Star Trek fans in attendance agree?
Yes.
I have to admit, I have not seen it.
What?
We should do a remote movie day.
Yeah,
We really should.
I'm the only non-recent Star Trek movie I've seen now is Wrath of Khan, or not? Yeah, whatever one The Greatest Generation did for their last tour.
You watched it for that?
Yes, right before we went to the show. Yes.
Okay. So, second of three reasons we're talking about Star Trek is we all played Star Trek Online together.
We did.
The four of us, plus our pal Lane. We talked about this in a previous episode that Steven was itching to try an MMO, and the only one I would agree to play, Star Trek Online. And so, Martha, you encouraged us all to actually do it, and we all did it, and we had a pretty good time.
Yeah.
We played the tutorial sections.
Yes, it was fun to play it with y'all. I don't know about the gameplay of the game. I mean, I don't know. I'm not signing up for an MMO for the gameplay anyways, so I'm cool with this. But yeah,
there's a lot of right-clicking an enemy and then just watching your. It's like MMOs are like third-person shooters or like third-person action games, but they don't play like that at all.
Yeah.
It took me quite a while to figure that out.
Movement was also painful, I feel.
Yeah.
Because
there wasn't great gamepad support, and this show is full of gamepad players.
Controllers or die.
No, never. It was a little wonky. I just expect every MMO to feel like World of Warcraft now, and it doesn't, and it didn't, and it shouldn't necessarily, but my instincts are trained that way, and so it did take me a while, especially because I haven't really dug into the analyzing it. And I think I might when we play it again. But I feel like there are some affordances in the UX and the UI that make it feel like it should play like a first-person shooter.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation.
So I will have to dig into that more the next time we play.
Yeah. Sure. It was kind of fun to see all the Star Trek lore in it, and it's very fan fiction-y, Like you fight like a ton of Borg ships immediately, which makes no sense really. But we got to hang out with Captain Nog. That was fun, right, Steven?
Yeah, that was nice. I did like that. That was cool. Yeah, actually, it was nice because like I'm not a huge Star Trek fan, but like I have watched the most of the Deep Space Nine. And so, like, a lot of the references in the beginning were Deep Space Nine references. I was like, oh, I understood that reference.
I thought it was very jarring, the fact that all the MMO, like, monetization stuff is in there in the Star Trek universe. Yeah. Because in the Star Trek universe, only, like, the Federation doesn't use money. So I thought it would have been less, like, out of context if they had all the merchants be Ferengi and like you had to use Gold plus Platinum with the Ferengi.
Right.
Like, that would make total sense to me, but they're not. It's like Star Trek, Starfleet people selling you stuff, and I'm like, wait, you don't have money? What is this?
Yeah, you have to buy a paint job on your Federation starship, which is like, all right, fine. I mean, it's a free-to-play game, so that's unavoidable, but yeah, it's more jarring than most games, I think, that have that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the standard is free, but if you want to get the expanded paint job,
right?
Yeah,
which we all did, right? We all spent like 20 minutes in the ship customization, like check out my flames.
Good time.
And I'm going through being like, oh, I want mine to look like really cool, like you could see on one of the episodes, and everyone else is just like, how can I make this more pink? That's the right attitude. You could have more fun that way. And I'm trying to like work within the confines of like the fictional Star Trek universe I love so much. But like, no, it's a toy box. I should just play with it. You know. And it's actually it's pretty good at that. Like it bends and breaks the rules of the fictional universe it's set, but like in a way that's like fun. Like I'm kind of into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. So we have our third Star Trek topic. Ellen, this one's yours.
Mm-hmm. I watched Picard. All of it. In a couple
like
days.
All in one go, or?
We split it up for like a couple days.
Yeah.
It is definitely like we binge things in this house. We don't have regular TV. We just binge stuff. Unless
this is a binge house family.
This is a binge family.
Yeah.
The only things we don't binge are the things that we are not allowed to, like Westworld. But yeah, we got onto CBS All Access and watched all of Picard, and I really liked it. I thought it felt more like Star Trek than a lot of the recent movies have for me. And it was kind of cool the way that they like, brought back a whole bunch of stuff. It felt a little bit like a theme park, kind of like the MMO did. Like, okay, they're only having this in here because everyone loves this character, but I appreciated it. I liked it.
Yeah, sometimes fan service is like, okay, like it does the job. It's fun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you see Discovery?
I have not seen Discovery.
Okay, because that's interesting, because I think Discovery lives in that place, the way you describe the recent movies and Picard, how it made you feel. I think Discovery lives right in between those things. You know, it has the true spirit of Star Trek, but it's also kind of got way too much action. Like, you know? Yeah. So I think everyone kind of approaches it a little differently. But I like Picard too. I think it had its, I guess maybe it's faint praise, but like it really had its heart in the right place.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. I think that nails it.
And that's kind of the most important thing for me for new Star Trek is like, you know, it's a billion-dollar franchise. And so I kind of don't care if it's great as long as it holds true to the values of Star Trek, which is a real thing. Like not a lot of franchises can claim to have like core principles. But Star Trek does. And it's like, they can be kind of crummy episodes even, as long as they hold true to that. That's kind of what matters to me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I don't pick up a Star Trek show to see, like, the best in television. Even though throughout my time watching a bunch of different Star Trek shows, I have seen some great television. But I go there for, the hope and the optimism, I think, is actually something that Picard mentioned. So
there's an amazing speech he gives, which, I mean, the finale's been out for a couple of weeks, so I don't think this, spoilers, you can skip ahead a bit, but there's this great speech where he's, like, all of the evidence in the show is telling you that this, like, terrible prophecy that the Romulans have been, worrying about is, in fact, a true thing. And their like, murderous rampage to prevent this horrible thing, you start to think, oh, maybe they have a point. And at that moment in the show, Picard gives this speech that just says, like, you know, we're better than that. Like, maybe there's this prophesized doom, but like, we're humans. We're smart. We're capable. We're empathetic. Like, we have tools. And I just loved that so much. And I don't know that the show paid it off 100%, but like that moment was so strong for me because it really was about, like, you know, if for a show that had like a mythical prophecy, which is like, I'm not excited about, that's real fantasy to me. Mm-hmm. And Picard had that and I wasn't excited about it. But just, I did like its take on it was a unique enough and Star Trek enough that I did get on board in the end.
Yeah, we could dig into this really in depth because I'm watching Picard along with Westworld, and they're similar. There's some similar topics and very different approaches.
Yeah, that's true.
So, but yeah, that sounds like bonus episode content or something.
Right. We'll have to chamber that one for later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need something to do.
Are you completely, like, how we talked previously about how you really just want to get out of the house, Steven? You want to get back to your office. Is that getting worse and worse now?
I mean, I just want to socialize with people. I live by myself, so the only people I interact with are the people I order food from, and then it's really just because everybody's like delivering food and just putting it on the door or putting it outside of your door. Like, I'll go out there and I'll pick up my food and they'll say thank you, like from 10 feet away or something. I'll be like, thank you. And then that is all the interaction I get.
And you really want to be like, what's new with you, pal?
Yeah, please talk to me. But I'm not doing that. So, yeah, it's kind of where I'm at. So I miss the office because I had daily interactions with people and stuff, and it was nice. But it's cool. I make it do with what I got.
Someday we will be allowed to breathe the same air as other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then that day I will be giving hugs.
Yes.
Lots of
so
hugs.
Watch out, everybody.
Steven's just running down the street, his arms outstretched.
And I'll tell you, like, we do imagine the end of this as being like a moment, but it's going to be a slow process. But once we all feel safe and that process is over, I would not be surprised if like random hugs on the street are not a common thing.
Yeah,
because it's a thing we all share. Like, it's we've, like, in my lifetime, we've had things that have been world events, but nothing that everyone on the planet shares.
Yeah,
in not exactly the same way, but in a lot of the same ways. So, you know, speaking to that Star Trek sense of optimism, I have a little bit of that as to how we're going to come through with this.
Yeah,
you know,
Steven, his arms wide.
Yes. See, if we had a Star Trek podcast, it would be redundant with this podcast because we talk about Star Trek so much.
Oh, you don't say. Martha expertly brought us into this topic, which is mine: redundancy. This is something in games that I think we talk about repetition in games, and this is a little bit of that. We'll probably recover some of that ground. But redundancy is.
Okay, keep going. Sorry.
But I think what we're talking about here is things that are do the same purpose, right? So visual cues and audio cues that are meant to communicate the same thing to the player. Mechanics that there are multiples of to either teach the idea by giving it to you multiple times, or by giving you a sense of like mastery by doing the same kind of thing over and over. So you have a that the redundant element serves a purpose in the end. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I want to talk about is like mechanical redundancy, because I think this is like the crunchiest part of it. And I think like stats is the main example I'm thinking of, like min-maxing stats. And this is a problem that I have with games where I just like, I don't like seeing the same systems over and over again, because I can kind of see through it and it kind of bothers me. Like as a game designer, I'm like, I don't need this 4 times. But like I'm not approaching it the way a lot of players do, where it's enjoyable in that sense. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah, well, I mean, specifically with stats, like oftentimes, most of the time in games, you want to deal as much damage as possible while taking as little damage as possible. So there are like things you need to in order to prevent that, and sometimes they'll differentiate it by like different types of damage you can deal or take. So like in like Pokemon, for example, there's what's it, physical and special attack and defense, and stuff like that. And then, but like they basically do the same thing. They're just like different forms of the same kind of thing.
Yeah, like you describe it, it boils down to that one ratio, like doing more damage and receiving less damage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But then it's like different types of damage, and then this thing is immune to this type of damage, but not that type of damage, and it ends up being just complicated, but it all still, when you reduce the common denominators, it all ends up being that simple equation again.
Yeah,
and I have a really hard time getting into that, but without it, the game would. A game would be essentially like very, boring, right? If it was just a simple matter of like this number is bigger than that number.
Well, yeah, and it specifically with that case, like because the stats are distributed amongst different types of damage outputs, the different ways you can deal damage end up becoming unredundant, I guess, in a way. Like because like if this thing is weak to fire and you do only fire damage, then like you're going to do really well. But if this thing is resistant to fire, you might need to consider a different avenue of damage in order to do it. But like if you could only just deal damage and take damage, then like the way the different ways you can deal damage will become unnecessary, or So like so as a result, like it adds at least some decision making before you start this encounter or whatever.
Yeah, and so sometimes it'll be a case of like preparing for what's ahead, and so the gameplay is in either guessing or knowing in some manner of your skill what you have to deal with.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's random, right?
Right.
And then like I'm thinking of like card games, like a game like Magic or Keyforge, where things pair well against something else or whatever, and like you bring out your this deck to deal with that person's that deck or whatever.
Yeah,
and a lot of the strategy becomes in that sort of predictability, and less in the actual mechanics themselves. It's almost like extra textual in a way.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think when you get into like the meta of a certain kind of game, the redundancy factor comes into like what role this deck or character or what have you serves versus another character deck or whatever. So like I'll bring fighting games in it because I get to bring something into the conversation too. There are a bunch of different kinds of zoners in fighting games. So like there are some characters that have swords or whatever and they can keep people away. There are other characters that can shoot projectiles and like that's their whole gimmick and stuff like that. But in games that have a ton of characters, there often are like 3 or 4 characters that like zone in the same way, and like maybe they have very distinct advantages and disadvantages in very situational occasions, but for the most part, like they do the same thing. And so like you can kind of pick at that point. You can kind of pick, if you like zoners, you can pick who you like best aesthetically instead. So like their role, but their like role and that character ends up feeling somewhat redundant as a result of them sharing the same space that another character does.
Right. The mechanics are redundant, but the aesthetics are not. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And I think that I was just thinking about the best kind of framework to use as a lens for this particular topic, for at least for my brain, and that was kind of putting it into like the MDA framework. You're talking about like repetitive or redundant mechanics that might create some repetition in dynamics, but their main difference is in the aesthetics. Coming back to what Mark was saying about something making it complicated versus complex, I guess. And I was thinking about Borderlands 3. I've been playing a lot of Borderlands 3 lately, and there's a bunch of damage types in Borderlands 3. There's frozen, and there's shock, and there's fire, and there's corrosive and radioactive, and they don't have slag in Borderlands 3, thank goodness. But and like in force, and so on and so forth. And I don't like to have to focus on all of them, so there are a couple damage types I completely ignore. Probably to my detriment in terms of min-maxing, but I don't. Yeah, it's some of that redundancy, or maybe at that point it's repetition. Comes across to be optional for the player. And I think maybe having that option is kind of fun, but not necessarily taking advantage of it, or at least having choice over how much to take advantage of that repetition.
Yeah, well, you were hinting at it just there at the end. That I was going to ask, like, do you feel that having those extra types that maybe you're not as interested in, because you said it both ways, it feels a little bit like you're missing out, but also it feels like maybe those are just your aesthetic choices, right? And so the game has all that complexity to let you pick and choose what you like, or is it, or maybe it's both, that it has all that complexity and you feel like you're missing out by not engaging with all of it?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I think it it's kind of I feel like it's kind of, I'm trying to think about this maybe in terms of musical analogy, but you've got, a few different characters, you've got many different ways to configure those characters, but those many different ways have some similarities. So regardless of what character you're playing in Borderlands 3, you are going to be able to play with some of the same weapons and some of the same damage types as all the other characters, even though they might have different abilities and they for sure have different aesthetics. And so those kind of repetitions, the repetition of those damage types and weapons and so on and so forth and mechanics across those different characters enables you as a player to feel like you have a lot of choice, because you do, even though if you're looking at some of those choices, you're going to see repeated or redundant dynamics, I think, in the way that those choices are set up. But the aesthetics of playing through that in those different ways might not feel repetitive. So if I play through the same story with the same character, Amara, that I'm playing, and I change her build up a little bit, or I deal different types of damage, it's going to bring a different experience, even though some of their experience is repetitive or redundant.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it too, because if you have those different, if you have multiple types of ways to do the same kind of thing, then as a player you can choose a play style or aesthetic that you enjoy more. So even though it is even though it is repetitive and it feels as though it's unnecessary to have this character or this damage type or something like that, you can still the feeling that you get from this form of thing can be different from another thing, even though they do the same thing. Right way of describing that, but yeah.
Well, when we were prepping the notes for this episode, Stephen, you brought up all the different character types in fighting games like Smash or in a game like League, and you're sort of getting at that, which is that having those redundancies is a lot about options,
right? But
then sometimes, as you were hinting at earlier, it can be where it's too many options, or there are options that are just not as popular after a time.
Yeah, so I think League of Legends is a particularly good example, because they built the game over time, and as the game became larger and they added more characters, they added more characters that could do more things, and that older characters were limited more, but they still did the same kind of stuff. And so League of Legends in the higher level meta or whatever, where pros are getting paid to learn how to play this game and compete against other people, it becomes a situation where there are characters that are just not seen in pro tournaments, because they do the same thing as another character but worse, right? Or they can't do as much stuff, and so they end up being you just don't see them anymore. I think at levels like me, for example, who's silver in League of Legends, it doesn't really matter who you pick. But if you're playing at super high tier diamond or whatever it is, then you really want to pay attention to who you pick, and so as a result, you'll get characters that can do that can shoot stuff, but also can block people or whatever. They'll be able to do more things, and I guess power creep, which I don't think we've talked about much on the show, but it's basically when as you start adding more things to the game, newer things become more powerful, and everything in the past is not as powerful, and it has to keep up. So you have to keep balancing things, and so things just become more powerful and more exaggerate and more what's the word? maybe like hard countery. Like this thing ends up becoming because it's so powerful, it ends up being a hard counter to this thing. And so like if you pick this thing the other thing will lose. So you have to pick you have to keep like, it's
you
like
always
a
have
rock,
to pick
paper,
Bayonetta.
Yes. yeah. Smash for a turn. You always have to pick Bayonetta. Yeah.
Well, you're touching now on a different definition of redundancy, which is that it's redundant and therefore can be shed away. So, like an older League character who doesn't have as much mechanical depth, perhaps, is redundant in the sense that there's no point to them.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
And not in sort of our more maybe heroic definition of redundant, which is like two versions that are equal. Right.
Yeah. And so, like, the way that Riot Games has solved this issue in League of Legends is by reworking older characters to make them as complicated as new characters. And so that just makes it so that everything is complicated and it sucks. These kind of
mechanics inflation.
Yeah. Actually, yes, that is kind of, it's like a budget, and they've just opted to put a lot of their budget into adding more mechanics to things.
Right. So, I mean, from where I sit as a designer, that feels like a total failure. But like the game is more popular than ever. So, it's a failure in that, like, people who used to play those champions, lose out on the old champion styles and stuff. Even though like some of the things that they used to do could have been problematic for the meta of the game, but like it creates. Basically, they're using an old champion to create a new champion, and so like they're breathing fresh life into it. So, new players can see that and go, "Oh, this champion is cool again," and then they'll play it. So right. It services the ongoing living nature of a game like that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's the question then: is as a designer, like how do you approach these kinds of things? Like how do you get comfortable with some of the consequences?
Well, I like for Vengeance, what we've tried to do what I've tried to encourage is instead of like sometimes we'll have some characters that like we want to serve a role, but we want them to do something different. I've encouraged us to make new characters to do that, which isn't great because like that's more work. I feel like
you guys had a pact like 3 years ago to stop doing that.
Yeah, well, the rules are meant to be broken, I guess. Like another way we've tried to do it is like we tried to add these abilities to characters through the shop system. Like you can purchase new abilities for your characters and stuff. So that, and like not every character has access to all these different things. So that allows them to be built in a way that like you could use one of the tankier characters in Vengeance, similar to other tanky characters, or you can use them or change the way that they do things so that they can deal more damage, but they'll deal damage in the way that makes sense for that character. And so like maybe they do more damage to a ton of enemies, but not as much damage to a single target or something like that. So you can spec them out in a way that makes them unredundant. But there are like redundant builds per se that you can have in Vengeance. That's how I've dealt with it.
Martha and Ellen, you have both had some time with Vengeance. So between those two options, more characters or more options on a fewer number of characters to introduce the sort of like advantages of redundancy, which approach speaks more to you?
Well, when I play Vengeance, I don't have this problem because I only play Sparky. Although you reworked Sparky at one point, and it really messed me up. But then I figured it out. So yeah. As long as Sparky's in the game, I'm good.
Well, that's like Sparky is a damage dealing character, right? We have a few characters that deal a bunch of damage, but like because we have avenues to make characters feel different or like serve different purposes, Sparky is allowed to exist in the game. It's a weird way of describing that, but
wow, I see how it is.
Do you know what I mean?
Just
like
alienate all your Sparky fans, Steven.
We can have Sparky as a damage dealer and also have other characters be damage dealers, and it's okay.
Got it. Yeah.
Yes. But Sparky is the best, so basically all other options don't matter.
Right, exactly. See, this is what I'm saying.
I hope I won those Sparky fans back.
Yeah.
You did.
Yay.
That kind of makes sense with the way that I was thinking about it, though, because like the way that I play Vengeance is with other people, and I feel like because of the way that I play with other people, it would be more fun for me to have more characters that have different kind of core abilities and have this broad range of different people I can choose and just jump in and start playing differently.
Yeah.
Although I really can appreciate the other type of redundancy as well, where you have like deep talent trees and lots of different flexibility in terms of what abilities you can grant your character, and sometimes you do run into redundancies or with the other people that you're playing with, or in the case of the Borderlands 3 playthrough I did recently, we had a really amazing ranged character and I was in melee, so I basically never got to anything. It was already dead by the time I got there. So it wasn't, I don't know if it was so much redundancy as, I don't know, bad planning. But yeah, I don't know. I think with Vengeance specifically, I lean a little bit more towards the broad range of characters.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Especially if you're jumping in.
Mm-hmm.
I think that works the best, because if you have lots of depth and you want someone to join, just, oh, hey, come play. Like, and they have to figure out a bunch of trees, like that might not be as fun as, oh, you get to pick between like, all these different characters, but you only have to learn like 3 things about each one.
Sure.
Yeah, I think as a multiplayer experience, that approach makes more sense. But as a single player experience, which Vengeance also is, it makes more sense to have those redundancies built as part of a customization system, right?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about like when I play with others, there's maybe 2 or 3 characters I sort of go towards, but I do because they are the clearest, the most clearly defined characters. I think that I'm more attracted to. But playing alone, I would have the freedom to be a little bit more, to play around a little bit more. But with multiplayer, I wouldn't mind having multiple characters that feel very similar in service of getting to the action.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like, you have 2 sort of all-purpose Mario types, or, high damage characters, or a couple of tanks or whatever. And enough differences between them, either, and it could be just purely aesthetic, or just like they start off with a different ability. That I feel like is a really good use of redundancy, but also it maybe takes away from the sort of unique qualities of each character that I think that you are going for. So like there's a tons of push and pull with systems like these, right?
Yeah, we basically just opted to do all the things. So
I mean, maybe my point is there's no perfect way to do it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like,
totally.
Like anything you choose is going to like live at 60% effectiveness in one category and 90% effectiveness in another, and then another player is going to come in and approach it differently, and then those same qualifications are going to have different success levels based on the way they play and the way the mechanics work. And then there's a single player and a multiplayer mode, and so like maybe chasing optimal balance for all that stuff is kind of difficult, and maybe that's why League can be a little messy, and it's fine. I'm giving it a lot of benefit of the doubt.
I mean, I think you're right. Like it's not just like game designers creating the characters, but it's also like the players approaching this game, and how they approach the game determines what is strong and what is not strong at any given point. And like as people play a game, they'll discover more things about it and start developing their own play styles and stuff that will. That will lean them towards one type of character or another type of character, and so like that builds upon itself. Where like if the best players at the game are playing this type of character, then people start building or they start developing strategies that beat that type of character and stuff like that. And it's like the way that games meta expands is really cool to see.
Yeah. Okay, so that's mechanical complexity, or mechanical redundancy, right? Yeah. But I want to talk about some of the specific examples, and we'll just blow through these by quick because there's a topic I want to get a little deeper on. Okay. But like, redundancy is not just about the same mechanics; it's about using different mechanics to serve the same purpose. So the audio is a really big one for this. So the examples I have are like sound sourcing, like where sound comes from. is paired with sort of visual indicators, flashing arrows and the like, the trails of blood, that sort of thing. To sort of, and the idea then is to like make it very clear that this is something that the designer is putting on the main path rather than a side path or a bonus or something like that. There's like a subtle language to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of interesting, and I think that requires like a lot of like, you don't know that you've done it right.
Yeah.
Like it could be too on the nose or not quite as much, which is sort of interesting. But then like there's also just tons of things like in UI having sound effects match up with actions to sort of make it very clear. And a lot of times when you're playing a game, you're not actually looking at the thing you're interacting with, like you're multitasking. And so having audio to help with that, I think, is really important. But then also like NPC dialogue, you have like characters saying like, like hinting the player where to go by talking about the thing they need to do.
Right.
Like kind of almost even to another character off on the side or something.
Yeah,
like that.
and then that thing being like a giant glowing ball of light or whatever to make it even more apparent this is the thing you need at this moment.
Yeah. But all of this is like, these examples are like tutorialization. And that's the topic I think I want to get into. And I think, Ellen, you have a lot to say on this topic. I sort of put in the notes spelling something out repeatedly, and Ellen, you seem to react to that.
The interesting thing about, so if you have a tutorial experience where you're teaching your player how to play, I think some of the best tutorial experiences when I think of kind of the explicit desire to create a version or a part of the game where the learner is learning to play by playing. I think of like Mega Man, and I think of Zelda. I think of Metroid, Super Metroid especially was really good. And one of the games that just completely pops into my head right now was Inside by Playdead. Because there's almost no explicit anything in the game. You just learn it by moving. And they use some of the elements you were talking about, Mark, to confirm to the player that yes, they are supposed to do the thing that they are trying to do. So they use light, they use sound, they use environmental restrictions to get the player just to start by moving from left to right. And make it very clear to the player that they're pretty much always going to have to go from left to right. And they can sometimes go backwards, but it might not always, there's not always going to be a reward. There's not something they're going to have to go do a lot with moving the opposite direction. They were using sound to keep driving that player from the, one direction to the next. And they use sound like there was this one specific spot in that game where, and it was so terrifying. If you haven't played Inside, it is, it's a scary game. But there was this sound that it was like getting louder and louder slowly as you moved through this zone. And it was like this thumping sound, and it felt muted, like it was behind a really huge door or a wall or something. And it got louder and louder and louder until you reached this end point of this zone where there was a door and a wall, and the sound was louder than ever. And so you knew, because of this redundancy in the lighting and the environment and in the sound, that you were about to see the thing. And it was done so well. But I think when I think about the redundancy of communication that you're talking about, Mark, like that moment for me in Inside completely fulfills that example. And it was so powerful and scary.
It sounds like that was kind of the sum is, what's the word?
Greater than the sum of its parts?
Yeah, greater than the sum of its parts. That's the one. Yes. Yeah. It sounds like that was that moment. And I think that like a lot of these kinds of things are that kind of thing. Like, especially when you combine audio and visual things, because I in the human body, they serve different purposes, but like in the game, they can serve the same thing. But like, so having both of those, having those combinations can help tutorialize something or make it clear that this is a good thing or make it clear it's a bad thing, stuff like that. It's helpful.
And then the question is in the example that Ellen cited, it's taking many different things that sort of contribute to the same purpose, and it feels of a single piece, right? And that's a little different from what other games do or what other games have to do, which is to use that redundancy to hammer it home, right? Either because it's something the player must know, because the system is complicated, right? The advantage of Inside is it's a very elegant design, so there's not a lot of complexity to get lost in, I think. But then the sort of the question I have is some of these repetitive elements that are required, are they there because people need to hear it twice to fully understand it, or because they need to hear it twice because they weren't paying attention the first time? Which, as when we do playtests, we know one thing about players is they don't read instructions.
Yeah.
And so like, does it feel a little bit like a failure that you have to, between the player and the game? Like, how do you make that feel good and not kind of like, hey, listen,
Yeah. I think the way, like Mario, for example, the way they approach it is they'll give you a new thing in the level. This is like how all Mario levels are designed. They'll give you a new thing in a level, and they'll give you it framed in a way where it's relatively unsafe, but you can experiment with it. Mm-hmm. And then they'll give it to you another way, but like it's more dangerous now. There's possibility of failure. And then like eventually by the end of the level, you'll get tested on it, where you have to do it. You have to show your understanding of this mechanic, this new thing, in order to finish the level. And so that could be a way of making something like having that redundancy, but having the threat level, the danger level, the difficulty curve makes it feel like a unique or interesting challenge.
Right. The mechanic is really that last challenge.
Yeah.
But the things leading up to it are the redundant elements, but it's kind of sneakily hidden inside additional ramping up gameplay.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Well, and human brains don't remember things perfectly the first time. That would be scary and probably not something we actually want. We remember or at least I do remember moments where it's like, okay, I should know your name because I've been talking to you for 2 weeks. I don't know your name. And that's embarrassing, and that's not a good feeling. But on the other hand, there's just so much stuff that you come into contact on a day-to-day basis that's not important to remember. And so that forgetting curve, and the learning designers, the learning theory behind this, I think, starts with Ebbinghaus. So that's a word we can put into the show notes. But it takes your curve. You hear new information or you encounter something new. And without reinforcement, that curve is pretty steep. And that your knowledge and your memory and your ability to recall important information about that thing, that concept, that place, that mechanic, without reinforcement drops off pretty quickly. And so before that curve hits bottom, you want to make another hit and reinforce what that understanding is, to bring that knowledge back to the top. And the more you do that within that curve, the more shallow your curve gets. So with reinforcement, your curve like kind of flattens out, and you can maintain strong knowledge or strong performance with that skill for a longer period of time. And I think good tutorial levels that don't just say, hey, here's the thing you need to press, and then never say it again. They deliberately reinforce the skill or the mechanic, or the pieces of the mechanic as the player progresses through that tutorial level. And they're doing that with a little bit of spaced practice to kind of reinforce that as the player's building their understanding of the game. And they're doing it to flatten out that forgetting curve so that knowledge of whatever that skill is or that mechanic stays top of mind as much as the player needs it.
Yeah. So how does that work with skills that need to be built on previous skills? Because the thing I was thinking of when you started talking about this is the creation tools in Dreams, which are really it's basically just learning Maya. Like, like it's not that much different. I mean, it's a little more fun than that, but like, and maybe not quite as complicated, but they're so powerful. And I had a lot of trouble with the tutorial because I wanted to move through it quicker than it would allow me. And I felt like, I got this. And then I'm like, I feel like I remembered how to do everything, but I didn't know why I needed to know half of it. Mm-hmm. And it felt like, but I'm like, that's probably not that it's a failure. It's just that it's hard to do something like that when you need to say, like, you need to learn this skill so that this skill will make more sense. And having that paced correctly for everybody is a real challenge, right?
Yeah, it is. There's a something that can become automatic. So when you're learning skills, And our language around describing what happens with learning is so limited, and I wish that we had other different words for like learning versus acquiring or honing or something, because when I think about learning, I think about learning a fact. When I think about a skill, I think about like practicing it. When you're first learning a skill in a game or not in a game or anything, you are consciously incompetent. You know that you don't know it. And and so you approach learning with a specific mindset that is appropriate to your conscious incompetence.
Unknowing.
Prior to that, you were unconsciously incompetent. You didn't even know that you didn't know. And as you start to do it, you realize, oh yeah, this is all stuff I don't know. Before I knew about, Borderlands 3 coming out on PC, I didn't even know it was something that I needed to learn. And then when I started the game, I realized I was bad at it. That was my conscious incompetence. Then when you practice more, you become consciously competent. You become knowledgeable about the skill. You become good at doing the thing, and you know that you're becoming good at doing the thing. Yeah. With enough practice beyond that, kind of into the realm of you become an expert, you are unconsciously competent. You do it without even thinking about it. And I think great tutorials in games are structured specifically to get you to that unconscious competence quickly. And I think they do that by planning repetition, but each repetition of the mechanic builds on it until you can use that mechanic, you can use that skill in the way that the game needs you to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a whole lot of sense. That's cool.
As designers, how can we make sure we're leveraging that?
Playtest.
Boom.
Well, that's a great note to go out on for this topic. the perennial advice from Nice Games Club.
Yes.
I feel like I should say something more than that. I don't know. I mean, like, I think as you're designing your tutorial, be aware that your player will go through those steps. It may take, depending on how complex your game is, how complicated and how complex your game is, it may take them longer to go through those steps than, it would if your game were something else. So, like, if your game were inside, your steps between conscious competence or conscious incompetence and unconscious competence is going to be pretty quick, because all you really need to do is run right and jump. And you learn to do that pretty automatically very quickly with just a little bit of practice. And then the rest of the game is just trying to figure out what in the environment is supposed to kill you. And the answer is pretty much everything.
And you learn that pretty quick.
But with like Final Fantasy, you might not get to conscious or unconscious competence until several hours into the game, because there are so many screens, and the real thing that happens with the story isn't even introduced until 20 hours in. And but those stages are still going to happen for your player. So just be aware that they're happening, and think about, be maybe explicit about where you're intending your learner to be, or where learner, at this point they're the same, where you can expect your player to be at any point in the game. So like, and validate with your playtesting that that's where they are when you're supposed to reach that point.
Yeah, I think a lot of times as designers we say, like, oh, this is the part where they learn it, and this is the part where they play it. But really, it's a wider gamut, right? It's a slower process that happens as they play, right? Not just like, oh, we did the tutorial part, now you know everything. It doesn't really work like that, right?
Right. Yeah. And that goes back to like the frustration I have about how we describe learning. Playing for humans is learning. Like, so are you ever done learning while you're playing the game? I don't think so. I don't know. You're practicing, you're still learning things. It's frustrating.
Oh my gosh. Now I'm going to call when I play video games, I'm going to call it my video game practice, and everything will be good.
Makes it seem more like a more valuable use of your time.
Yes, exactly.
Do y'all use Twitter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Are you following Nice Games Club on Twitter? The answer better be yes.
It's one of the only ones that I yes.
Good. It's fun. It's a good place, and Dale does a really good job retweeting things and tweeting about stuff. One of these tweets that Dale posted recently is like, "This is what it'd be like to be your cat." Where like this guy who's just eating breakfast, as though like as though he was in the room with you to practice social distancing. It's less awkward than it sounds, but still awkward.
It sounds deliciously awkward.
Yeah, but it's pretty great, and I appreciated that tweet. So I wanted to shout it out.
That's one of the 3 categories of tweets that Dale puts out, which is retweeting game dev content, things that make her laugh, or cat content.
Yes,
that's the 3 pillars of Nice Games Club Twitter.
Yes,
basically this. Yeah. So you can get more. Yeah, exactly. You can get more of that content on our Twitter at Nice Games Club.
Once we can all go back to being in physical spaces with other people, one place that people could go to is an arcade.
Aha! Yes, that's my topic. It's arcades. Because I went to Uptown like 2 months ago. In the before times. Yeah, I went to Uptown, which is a modern arcade. It's basically
barcades.
Yeah, right? It's like it's an arcade but with alcohol.
Arcade is copyright with copywritten, trademarked.
So is it really?
That's why everyone who has a barcade doesn't call it a barcade, because the barcade bar in Atlanta or wherever it is very, very
very litigious.
Yes, litigious. That's the word.
Yeah, because it's a cool word.
I bet
they have Kleenex there.
And Q-tips. But I went there and I thought that I was thinking about how arcades that I think of when I think of an arcade, which is like the classical, there's just a bunch of arcade machines and a bunch of 12-year-olds running around smacking their joysticks or whatever to get the thing to move. It's very different from the Uptown place that I went to. Because first of all, there was alcohol and 12-year-olds can't drink alcohol. At least not in the US. And the building was not really it wasn't really built for an arcade, because the bar was in the center of the room where I think people would be running around playing arcades or whatever. So it was really hard to move, especially because it was really packed when we got there. It was really hard to move between different games and stuff because all of the different because it was just so packed. It was a lot. And then it had an 80s aesthetic, which makes sense for arcades, I think. But it had what was it? American Gladiators playing on TVs and stuff, which was kind of neat. But they still had a lot of the classic games. So they had Street Fighter, they had Punch Out, they had a Super Mario Brothers arcade game. We played this one arcade game. I can't remember what it was, but it was a baseball arcade game. There's a bunch of classic arcade games that you could play.
Yeah.
And so it still was an arcade, and I just liked seeing how arcades have modernized it in that way, because I don't think they, at least here in the US, they don't really have a classic arcade place anymore. Mm-hmm. Or at least they don't in Minnesota. I don't know. I haven't heard of one.
Even when I was a kid, in the 90s, arcades were, there were very few standalone arcades.
Yeah.
They were usually part of, a mini golf complex or something like that.
Yeah, or the bowling alley or the movie theater.
Right.
Yeah, right. It had a
off
section.
To the side.
Yeah.
And there's those 2 eras of arcades. There's the 80s era of the arcade, which was a standalone place. And then, not that this didn't exist later, but then the 90s era of arcades, which was much more entertainment complex. And then the different games associated with that. I think about that a lot. There's the Punch-Outs and the Pac-Mans, and then there's the Street Fighter and X-Men.
Right.
And the ones that are the giant racing games that you actually climb inside.
Yeah.
That came along later.
Well, yeah, actually, a lot of those kind of arcades are now like Dave and Buster's or something, where they still serve alcohol, but like it's a it's built where like they have their own specific games, and people like a lot of those games are gimmicky theme games, like based off of movies that are coming out, new movies that are coming out, or popular mobile games. Like there are Flappy Bird arcade games, which is weird to me, and stuff like that.
My brain is broken.
What's that?
My brain breaks at this.
Oh, yeah, it's really weird, but I guess because this game is popular, they assume that like it'll get people to come out to Dave and Buster's and spend a bunch of money on tokens. Like that aspect of games is still prevalent in arcades, modern ones too, where like you just have a ton of tokens and you can use them to, and you like play the game a bunch, and if you die or whatever, you have to put in more tokens to keep doing it. So like it's a money grabbing scheme. But like
only in a place like Dave and Buster's, they give you like a card that you like fill in with money.
Yeah,
and they keep they don't make it very easy for you to know how much is left on there, because they want you to kind of just like it's there's lots of tactics.
Oh yeah, well yeah, like designing an arcade game, there's a lot of different approaches to it, but they all boil down to how can we get people to spend as many tokens on this game as possible. Which, I mean, yeah, that was the money model back in the day. It kind of has a similar experience to like microtransactions in modern games now, except it's a little different because like a lot of them are free, so like they try to get you to spend money by giving you enticing things you'll want instead. But like I found that very fascinating to see how arcades have like modernized in recent years, and I guess I wanted to talk about that. That was a long introduction to the topic, but I wanted to talk about like our experiences with arcades.
So, Stephen, I have a question for you about
yes.
Up Down. So I've been there, but it was a long time ago, and I don't really recall.
Yeah.
Is your sense, based on just your experience there, are the games there set up to really encourage people to use a lot of tokens, or are they making money off like the bar food and the alcohol?
I think they're pretty generous with the tokens that they give you, I think. And it's kind of hard to it's kind of hard to just like move between different arcades and try new things, so you like kind of have to stick at one arcade because of how the floor layout is. But like all of those games are old games, and all of those games were built to encourage people to spend tokens. So they are still like the games still, are meant to make money. I think they also make a lot of money off of the bar.
Yeah, they're generous with their tokens to keep you there and keep you drinking.
Yeah.
So. I mean, because arcades are not for kids anymore, right?
Yeah.
Which isn't to say there aren't still, skee ball parlors, right? Which is the name I'm giving them. But, but yeah, a lot of it is about nostalgia, and so it makes a lot of sense. Because I have not in the too far in the recent past played through the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade game at one of these barcades with my brother-in-law, and it's kind of fun, but like. Also, if I didn't have like the roll of quarters that my sister-in-law gave us, like I don't know that I would have been like interested in like feeding it anybody, like the way I might have as a kid, and so I could totally see that like the enticement is less about filling up those quarter bins and more about just keeping you in the place and providing it as like a bonus experience to a dining experience or a drinking experience or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I think like places like Up Down or Dave and Buster's are designed for that purpose, right? Like, well, I mean, I guess a lot of the arcade games at Dave and Buster's are not old school arcade games. Most of them are modern things that they've built for this purpose, and so I think more modern games tend to be gimmickier. Like, they have like peripherals and stuff are explicitly designed for that machine and nothing else. Whereas other ones, like older ones, have joysticks and buttons, like the punch out and whatnot. But like they're still designed to get people to keep playing it. And
I mean, there's an interesting hardware note about that, which is like you can really get down the YouTube rabbit hole on this, but like arcade systems were sort of like consoles, in that there was an arcade platform that many games worked on, right? And they sometimes they even came in cartridges that you just slotted in. They were like these ridiculous giant-sized cartridges. And they worked like console systems. They were just really powerful. And so they needed some universality to them, right?
Yeah,
and so,
okay.
And then custom-built machines that had unique controls had limited reusability, right? You couldn't put another game into it.
Yeah.
And of course, that required more than just swapping the cartridge. You have to change the art and do all this stuff. But like, or maybe sometimes it wouldn't have the same number of buttons exactly.
Yeah.
But like the hardware that was designed to be more flexible.
Sure.
In the 80s and 90s. And I think now everything can just run off an Arduino and use any kind of input at all. So it makes more sense to build purpose-built machines. Which isn't to say they didn't do that in the 90s also, but like that seems to be less of a manufacturing risk, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I bet a lot of those machines are explicitly built for Dave and Buster's. So Dave and Buster's is like, I'm going to buy this Sonic the Movie arcade game or whatever.
Yeah. I think I've even heard that in their advertising, like only at whatever, because they're the only customer of that kind of product.
Exactly.
Right.
That's probably a pretty stable surface as long as the games are making enough money. That's kind of neat.
I mean, no one's going there now, but
right. That's true.
Someday.
Yeah.
The after times.
But yeah, I think we all kind of grew up past the age of when arcades were popular. But the experiences I had with arcades were basically like at a movie theater or at like maybe they had like an arcade station at the state fair or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that was most of the arcade experience that I had. Is
What
that similar to y'all? What games did I play? One game I really liked, when there was a bowling alley that we used to go to when we were in elementary school, and there was this one game called, I think it was called Dino Dash or Dino Run or something, and you basically just like time your mashes to this button to get your dino to run the fastest. But that was super fun. I think it was probably just because you get to slam the button really fast. Mm-hmm. That's the game I most remember playing as a kid.
Yeah.
But
in the
yeah,
case of...
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think in the case of our generation, that because our arcade experiences were sort of limited in a lot of ways, there is one or two games we remember.
Mm-hmm.
Is my guess.
Yeah.
But I'll put that to the test. Ellen, Martha, when do you want to chime in?
I just remember playing Pac-Man somewhere, but I have no memory of where it was. I just remember getting frustrated because I'd have to go ask my parents for more quarters.
Oh.
And like at the state fair, they have all the arcade tents or whatever.
Yeah.
And I just remember going and watching people playing DDR.
Oh, yeah, right.
There's like some really, really good people. Like people go on show off at the state fair and like are just dancing really, really, really fast.
Well, yeah, that was that's a specific thing I didn't consider because I didn't really play DDR, but like that game brought on its own era of arcade stuff where there were a lot of like rhythm based arcade games that were built because of how popular DDR was, and like I know that like it became a point where like it expanded to consoles, and you could you could play DDR at home with the DDR mats that they had. Yeah, that was cool.
So, yeah, there was that time where those rhythm games sort of revitalized arcades, but I think they revitalized wherever they were. I don't seem to recall more arcades being built in that era. Yeah, necessarily. It just brought some more people to those places that still had machines.
Yeah,
right. At least in America, right? Like I think like taiko drumming is still available at many locations in Japan, right?
That's true.
Like Konami still makes a bunch of stuff, and there's other cultures that still have a large arcade presence, but we're just talking about our country here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Ellen, do you have any arcade games you remember fondly from your youth?
I don't remember the name. I do remember our movie theater in the town where I grew up, which was like ruralish Minnesota, exurb Minnesota. Had a bunch of arcade games. We would play them like when I was in middle school. We'd go there, and before the movie started, or for sometimes well after the movie ended, we'd hang out in the lobby and we'd play the games there. And I remember there was one where it was shooting asteroids in space. I'm shooting something in space. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it wasn't something I would spend hours at there because it was kind of like a before and after activity. But I would always look forward to getting to the movie theater a bit earlier or staying afterwards to try to, pop some recorders in and do a better score than I did last time.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, and I bet in movie theaters are particularly well equipped to have people have arcades, because arcade games tend to be shorter games, like the sessions anyways. They're like 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes. And like if you're waiting for, you're going to the movie theater and you're looking for a movie to watch, and you're waiting for this movie to start, you can just go to the arcade, pop in some quarters or whatever and play some games before seating is opened and stuff.
Yeah. Anywhere where there's a couple of minutes to spare and a large lobby, to place a machine or two, like that seems to be conducive. In movie theaters, absolutely. The movie theater that I grew up near and later worked at had a Gauntlet machine, a 4-player Gauntlet machine.
Yeah.
And I grew up with Gauntlet on the NES.
Yeah.
So when I became like a preteen and saw this machine there, and then later as a teenager and I worked there, like it was nostalgic already, and the machine was even older, than my NES port, right?
Yeah. Wow!
And so that's kind of an interesting sort of backwards way into it. But I also remember that location also had a Cruisin' USA, which was on the Ultra 64 arcade board. Which was the basis for the Nintendo 64.
Okay.
And it was when it was like a Silicon Graphics arcade. It actually didn't have like a ton. It was close, but not exactly a Nintendo 64. But you would see, many people know that Nintendo 64 was in marketing or in press called the Ultra 64 for a long time before it got its actual name, and they were going to call it that. And I think cooler heads prevailed. But the only place you can still see that as a branding expression is in some of these arcade games where that system was used. And I remember distinctly, and then like waiting, like, oh man, like this new Nintendo system is going to come out, and it uses a Silicon Graphics supercomputer, and it was like, I bought into all that hype.
Yeah,
I remember
that's
that
cool.
distinctly.
Yeah,
but the other one is the bowling alley I was at when I was a kid had Mortal Kombat. Before it was put on consoles, and so that I played Mortal Kombat when it was in arcades, and then and got pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And then got it for Genesis later and did the blood code and all of that. But
but
I only ever even got it even as a kid. I didn't like violent video games, but like I played in the arcade because it was like one of two machines that was there.
For sure.
And so otherwise I wouldn't have wanted it and played it for as long as I did at home either.
Yeah.
And then got Virtua Fighter and actually liked fighting games a little bit in that era of my youth.
Oh, what happened?
I grew up, Steven.
Wow.
Dang.
So I have a question for you guys. It's kind of like a future-oriented question, but like, you mentioned Up Down and Barcade trademark. So there's a place, in our ecosystem of gaming and social, places, at least for the after times, where you can go and you can play arcades, and it's a social place. And the point of your going to this location is to play the games that are there and have a good beer. But we've also described, at least in the past, arcade games being present kind of in these staging areas where you are getting ready to go do something else. You're getting ready for your bowling lane to open up. You're getting ready for your movie to start. You're waiting for your boyfriend to get popcorn, and you're going to go play a little bit of Mortal Kombat or whatever. Is there still a space for that, given that mobile phones are so ubiquitous?
You can't be as bored sitting in a lobby anymore.
Oh, that's a good question.
Good question.
I hadn't considered that before. If you have your phone, there's plenty of free games on your phone. There's less of a social aspect to most of those to mobile games, at least in terms of socializing with people you are with in the moment. So, like, if you play at an arcade machine, everybody can watch you play at the arcade machine, and there are multiplayer arcade games. So I think
that's a theme to some of these more gimmicky machines, like a Dave & Buster's, is they have enormous screens.
Yeah,
they're meant to be watched by others.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that, like, and plus part of the fancy machines have like gimmicky looking peripherals and stuff that like encourage you to come over and see what's up, and play something in a way that is unique to that particular game.
I just remembered about the fact that we have pop-up arcades happening all the time in the indie game community. Like whenever we show off games at conventions and stuff, you'll have like either people bring screens or they make have projectors and project them onto projector screens or whatever. And that's basically it's a traveling arcade or a ephemeral arcade.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And people play in the same way too. They pop in for a minute or two, and it's the arcade experience, even if it's games that weren't necessarily designed to be played in arcades.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I have an idea. We get a food truck, right? And then we make an arcade truck that just follows the food truck around.
Yes.
That wasn't where I thought you were going with that. I thought you were just like arcade truck, but actually your idea is better.
While you're waiting for your food from the food truck, you go to the arcade truck.
Like also like sandwiches or whatever. I love it.
That's pretty good.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I was actually curious, what it would take to design an arcade game, especially in modern times. There's one popular game that was really popular at Uptown that I played a lot called Killer Queen, where like you are a team of I think 5, and like one of you is the queen and the other 4 are like the queen's lackeys. It's like you're like queen bee, and then like you compete against this other team. And that's a really cool game because like it's simple enough for people to get into, but like complex enough for people to like really get into. And so like I ended up spending most of my tokens in that game compared to like other games. And so I think that is probably a lot of what would make a compelling arcade game is a game where it's really easy to play, hard to master sort of games, where like you can keep like the more tokens you put into the game, the better you get at the game, and the more enjoyment you can squeeze out of the game. And that's I don't know that there's a lot of arcade games that are built in that way. I know that there's... No, go ahead.
Like Fingeance is an arcade game. It has continues. You know what I mean?
It's very
it's very explicitly an arcade game. And that if it were in a coin op environment, it would have that same kind of pull between like, if I'm good enough, I can get through it without spending $4.
Yeah.
Like that's part of the motivation, right? It's like you don't feel as like ripped off by the because it's your fault that you didn't, you know what I mean? Like I think it's a bit of a lie, but it's like a very effective one that arcade machines use to drain your wallet, right? And I'm making it sound very terrible, but like that's part of the tension of it. That's part of the like the why you don't want to die. It's because you have infinite lives as long as you have a pocket full of quarters, right? But like it does cost you something to keep going, and so that tension is part of the fun in ways. Yeah. But I don't know why have you not thought of this before, but having Fingeance on a arcade machine at one of these barcades, it would do very well.
Yes,
it would do. Oh,
arcade truck, arcade truck.
I'm going to think about that and consider options because you're absolutely right.
I'll help you build the McCabinet. That sounds.
Dang! Wow. Okay. Hold on. We could. Woo. All right. Well. Cool. Well, all right. I guess the answer to that question is build Fingeance.
Yeah. I think a lot of people's first games, right? Fingeance is your first big game, right? A lot of the first designs that people put together are very arcade inspired. Yeah. Right? Metro Nexus is explicitly an homage to an arcade game. I don't know that it would do as well in a modern arcade environment because there's enough changed about it now. But a lot of times when indies will make things that are arcade friendly because arcades are generally revolve around these like short, snappy gameplay loops. Yeah. Right. And then and sort of optional complexity. Right. Right. Yeah. If it exists at all. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's lots of examples. And of course, games in the design process will grow past that a lot of times. Yeah. I think Fingeance is an exception in that it really like refined it in a way and it kept its arcade styling in a way Like, it added a lot of depth and complexity and nuance and content without, like, running away from its arcade inspirations.
Yeah,
right. Which is what happens. That's what happens in Metro Nexus. It started out with a lot of the same arcade gameplay, but then its design just walked away from it.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. And that's okay.
Happens a lot, but
yeah,
there's probably still plenty of games out there that would just work very well drop into an arcade system.
Yeah,
I can imagine the cabinet and all the decorations on it. It'd be so cool.
Wow. I had not really considered this, but I am seriously considering it now.
I mean, just imagine those amazing, those little buttons, the left gadget, right gadget.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's big. Yeah. I'm, now I'm very distracted
drop this call and go in.
BRB making game.
Well, you've got plenty of time to plan it because it's going to be a while before you can execute.
Right.
It's very true. It's very true. I'll just have my own Fingen's arcade cabinet in my apartment, and it'll be great.
Yes.
Build it out of a couple of milk crates.
Yes.
Like the off-the-grid arcade, kind of like off-the-grid restaurants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have there's the local cabinet that has a bunch of local games. The Donutron is at Glam Doll Donuts in Minneapolis.
That's very true.
Yep, and that has I think it's just a PC like stuffed into an arcade machine. It looks gorgeous, and it just has a launcher on it, and it can run any local game and has plenty on it already.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really cool expression. I think I'm surprised that's not more common as a thing, because there's lots of like plans on the internet for how to build stuff like that. But I think it requires a community of game makers to populate it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Which we have here. And the Donutron folks have actually put together. But, I would like to see more of that.
Mm-hmm.
In the after times.
Yeah.
Or the after times.
That's our show. If you liked it, leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app and tell all your friends too. If you're interested in any of the topics we talked about on this episode, make sure to check out our website, nicegames.club, for more show notes and links to resources. Like with playtesting our games, we are always looking for feedback on the podcast. You can go to nicegames.club/feedback and tell us what you think. Get in touch with us on Twitter at nicegamesclub, where Dale tweets game dev resources and pictures of cats, or by email at contact@nicegames.club. Ask us questions or give us suggestions for topics.
So until we start again, remember to
play nice
and make nice.